To Morning Bites with Stu, Violet, and me, Jason. This is a show where we take 30 minutes to talk about the latest that's happening in cybersecurity and privacy. Before we get started, just a few ground rules. Our views and opinions expressed here are just our own. And if you do have any questions that pop up or you want to leave a comment, just drop a comment in the LinkedIn session. We will be able to see it, and hopefully Stu will give a witty remark back. So, Violet, start us off this week. What have you been reading? What's at your top of your mind this month?
Well, first of all, happy Valentine's Day. I see Jim Leonard is wishing us all a happy Valentine's Day too. But my biggest question this week, the hyperfixation that I can't get around is, what do we think the media policy looks for Kendrick Lamar and his team? Like, do we think, Stu, what have your kids been saying? Is this like something that is millennials are just like behind, and then we're just
Well, I don't think they're thinking about the
fixation?
privacy policies, but my kids do love Kendrick Lamar. That is for sure. They call him the poet of their generation.
Billy Joel was the one I used to say was the poet of his generation, not mine, but his. Nate, bell bottoms.
My son keeps yelling through the house mustard just over and over, just through the house. So
I only
that's
know
how
A
it's.
minor. Okay, well
I don't
then.
Yeah, well, we've completely lost an entire generation within 30 seconds of this the start of this show. So I'd say we're off to a good start.
She probably knows. She's cool. All right, keep
What
going.
happened at the Super Bowl too, isn't it?
All right, Nate, what do you got? What's your story?
So I am starting with the Power Schools event. So quick background for everyone, just to kind of catch everybody up to the same page. So Power Schools had an event back in December. It is impacting about 75% of K through 12 students across North America. When you take a look at what Power Schools is it's basically a platform that you have to use to enroll in school in most cases. And some of the details behind the platform is some districts are requiring that you have a significant amount of information in the platform. Others are a little more lax, and it's really just the students' grades and parent contact information. But what ended up happening here is a hacker was able to gain access to the credentials of a single user. They were able to then get access to the maintenance access level, where they were able to download millions of children's personal information. Some of the negative parts surrounding this story is the company was not aware it was the victim of the attack until a few days after it happened, when the ransom demand popped up, and Power Schools reportedly paid the hacker. So lots of stuff going on this one.
It's funny you say paid the hacker, because I heard it from multiple people who got this letter that weren't even privacy security professional that read, is that what that sentence means? Like it wasn't hidden. It wasn't hidden that well. Do you remember what it said? Something like we did everything we could to ensure that your data was not exposed.
That's like the standard response. I think they went further on this one. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was pretty direct. Like it didn't leave a lot of room for interpretation.
I have not gotten any of my letters. I actually called their helpline to see if we were impacted, and that kind of went in circles a couple times. And
I love testing helpline. I love
yes,
testing.
The other said no, we don't let you know if you're impacted. So I think.
Well, I can add some flavor to that, Nate. Is what Power Schools was the vendor to the school districts. So the school districts are really the owners of the data that you're talking about. So it's just the way the law treats data owners versus data, I'll just call them processors for this conversation, like Power Schools. Might be different obligations on the different entities. And in this instance, Power Schools believed its first obligation was to notify the school districts that this in fact happened, because it was really their data they were the data owners that was affected, and then gave the school districts a chance to take some action with their help, with their coordination, to comply with any obligations arising from this situation, the notifications that you're talking about. So in that regard, I would say that PowerSchool was, we often encourage our clients to maintain transparency and competency. I think I've said that before in this program. And I would say certainly with transparency, the school districts that we worked with were contacted early by PowerSchools and regularly by their sales team, and maintained whatever access to information was requested.
The one thing that stood out to me with PowerSchool is that it impacted both the cloud users as well as the on-premise. And like, I feel like that's not something that you typically will see. Usually it's one or the other, right? Especially like new vulnerability comes out. Most of the time you're going to see it impact the on-premise servers, but cloud is okay. And, typically if there's a compromise of an account, admin style, right, it's going to give you, I think in this case, it was like a support account or something like that. If that's just a SaaS application, then it's usually just stuck there, because you would usually think that on-premise means completely isolated, no connectivity, you're running it yourself. So that's what stood out to me, was that this was just much worse than it could have been had that connectivity not even been there.
And Jason, if you don't mind me pushing you a little bit, what does that tell us, right? What does that tell us about cybersecurity?
I mean, it really comes down to if you're concerned with your security, and typically like companies that are more concerned with, I don't want that, the cloud provider to have my data or anything like that, they typically will go towards the on-premise because they have more control over how you set it up, how you secure it, everything like that. The first thing where my mind went to is, did they even know that this was even possible? Right? I didn't go read any of the documentation to see if, is this a known feature or anything like that. But you really got to see, hey, if you're doing on-premise, is there some sort of connectivity going back that you're not aware of? And two, like, you might have to put some additional blocks in place to try to prevent that if you're really worried about this type of scenario, which, this kind of, it feels like a little bit of an edge scenario here, but still, like, for the paranoid, you got to take that extra step now and say, like, is there connectivity that you just wouldn't think of? Gwen, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think, can you guys hear me okay?
Perfect.
Everybody's nodding. Good. It's difficult because what everybody really wants is good information when an event comes out like this. And I think that a lot of people really rush to get messaging out there to kind of stop the bleeding, at least on the comms perspective. But sometimes too fast is not good enough, or too fast creates more confusion. And I think, from the perspective of everybody downstream that's had some impact from PowerSchools, I'm not sure that there was a good enough amount of information to be able to articulate what happened, how it happened, what data was impacted, and how that related to all those school districts that were impacted, the data owners, like Stu mentioned. Part of it is, being able to communicate to the student body that we're faculty members that also, I hear had their data impacted as well. Here's what happened, and here's how we're dealing with it. And, an easy fix isn't necessarily credit monitoring, especially if it's data that's not protected by credit monitoring, right? Like SSNs are protected by credit monitoring, but what if it's something more sensitive, like an IEP, or things about your family or your student or your son or your daughter that, what's credit monitoring really going to do? And without having an idea of what's really going on, how are these schools able to say this is the only data, or this is, wasn't the worst case scenario? And I think people are left out there saying, well, I had this credit monitoring product, I know something happened, but I really don't know a whole lot. And I think that creates more confusion. And it's right for people getting, upset about it, right? Like, what do I do? Right? So.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it feels like that whole kind of part of the response lifecycle is the most underserved, because we've outgrown credit monitoring. That's clear. You explained that well. And, I see sometimes where we'll go and say, hey, we're scanning the dark web to see if it's getting sold or anything like that. And that's helpful. But you never have a full picture of it, right? There's still plenty of comms or conversations that are happening that nobody else has visibility into, and that data can exchange hands. So it really leaves the victims in a tough spot where they're just waiting to see if fraud pops up somewhere.
So some of the details that were also available through some of these articles is that they're estimating about 60 million students are impacted by this, up to maybe 10 million faculty are impacted by this. About 25% of the students are expected to have Social Security number impacted by this. And we're talking about credit monitoring and whether or not that's effective or appropriate. Credit monitoring is not available for the 60 million population because the students, if they're under 18, they should not have a credit file. And the downstream impact on all of that is a lot more complicated, going back to my roots in the identity theft space of when you have an impacted minor, that information and when that stuff happens, it's a lot harder to detect, and then it's a lot harder to fix after you actually find it. So oftentimes these minors don't find out that this has even happened or that their information's been impacted until they need to start using it when they turn 18, when they do background checks, and when they try to get jobs for the first time. So I know
they've been doing studies on that, Nate. Like the whole what is the best time to perpetrate identity theft, and there's studies and show how much more vulnerable it is because of the length of time that they have before this unravels. There are
right.
I mean, this was back in, I remember people have been talking about this back before Target and Home Depot and all of these things, saying hey, there is so much more time and there's no credit monitoring product that's 18 years old.
Well, you might end up having 5 years of data and records all pointing to the wrong person, that it is not actually this student, it's not this minor. So it's a lot harder to fix the problem down the road as well.
And that's a good tie-in to something, Stu, I think you wanted to talk about. We're talking about kind of fake identities here, or stealing identities.
Yeah, it's a good segue. Yeah.
What's been on your mind?
So what's been on my mind is that identity management has been on my mind. Identity is the new perimeter. And we've had a few assignments recently involving, I just call them fake employees. So what happens is you'll have fake employees using fraudulent identities that get jobs, especially in IT, software development roles or other remote work environments. And they're imposters. And so they use stolen identities, or they'll use deep fake interviews, or they'll use falsified credentials that they purchased somewhere, and they get jobs. And in some cases, if it's sensitive jobs, they'll provide information because they might be state sponsored. We had a matter where there was some connection to North Korea. That wasn't for spying, but the allegation was that they were making payments back to North Korea, which is of course a sanctioned entity under US law. And what happens from a privacy perspective is that when there's a discovery of a fake employee, there's potential unauthorized access now into sensitive data that belongs to the organization. So in that regard, sometimes it's the business information, like secrets or proprietary information, but other times it's straight up the vulns, the fulls, the identity profiles, HR records, etc. So we've been trying to counsel organizations on both in the peacetime and unfortunately in reactive mode, in incident response, doing those sort of data privacy investigations. But there's a lot I think you can do on the front end. Jason, I'm sure you know more than I do, but about what to do, especially essentially just having that zero trust mentality of when it comes to identity management, and verify. So even existing employees, a lot of times it's not like month 1, month 2, month 3 that this comes out. You learn it, much later. So if I saw it only one time, I would say all right, I read it in the news a few months ago that this happened, but now we're getting assignments that are arising out of this. So I definitely wanted to raise this issue.
Yeah, I feel like it started off a lot with some of the tech companies, but it has been picking up steam, and I think there's a few different areas that you have to look at. Is like one, in the interview process, are you actually picking up through background checks or whatever? Like, is this a stolen identity? And like, I'm always curious. I really want to know how they do interviewing, or if it's just like low interview standards, or if they're really actually solid on what they're doing. And then two, like the scary part is how much access are you giving to your new employees, right? Because I think to your point, Stu, on zero trust, like I would venture to say most companies are going to start off with just giving you full access to all the systems and data that you would potentially need, even if you don't need it on day one. And there's nothing stopping that employee from just scooping that up. And, if they get caught in 3 or 4 days, the damage could potentially already be done.
Yeah, I agree. And it ends up triggering obligations to notify third parties. And then sometimes there's law enforcement investigations. So it becomes a waste of time, and time is money, as we all know. So it's best to avoid. So that was my subject of the month, because I thought it was a very interesting new type of claim that we've been seeing.
I love
I
it.
feel
Yeah,
like we need a call-in hotline too, as the comments is awesome. But while you guys were talking through the identity piece and connecting it all together, Dara Gibson sent me a link that, like, an article she wrote on Power School. Steve Stransky put in the comments a link for Power School specifically coming from them. I would check out both of those. And also, I thought it was hilarious that Brian Duke added that for identification, he had to show his driver's license on his recent interview, which I'm like, oh my gosh.
in the interview. That's crazy. I haven't heard of somebody doing that in the interview. Interesting.
I mean, that's helpful. I mean, post interview, I think some things you can do are to run some background checks. But I think, it's, and you use a third party for that. You're not interacting with the person in the same way that you interacted with them through the interview, kind of the same verification that we use for like wire fraud when an event, when a banking credentials change, like you go to another source. You don't kind of converse with the folks that you were, just on an email with, and just by replying and saying, was that you that I was on an email, an interview with? But I think it's pretty fascinating. But I mean, think about all the things that people can get into if they are employed.
It's a lot of trust right off the bat.
I mean, you could do it day one, right? Like, do everything that you need to do day one and be like, okay, bye guys. It's not working out for me. I don't like my office. But.
That's what Connor. Sorry, my daughter is.
I think she's showing what you're having for dinner later.
The recipes? Yeah, we could turn this into a cooking show. That's okay.
This is a cooking show. Yeah. She likes that. No, the one, what was the group? Know Before did a really good job of, and that's what you like, Jason, when people like are out front and transparent about, hey, we had this issue. The Know Before, it was the day one. Remember, it was like they went through all of it, and then day one, they just went like, let's just open up everything, pull as much as we can, and that was like the kind of the tripwire that set it.
That's right. And I can't remember if it was Know Before, if it was somebody else. It might have been Sentinel-1, where they actually detected the employee trying to install malware on the system.
I feel like that was Know Before. But
was it Know Before? Okay.
Well, they caught the guy Know Before he was able to do anything. And I think that that's like really important too. And I think something that got missed in the release that they saw this happening is that they caught it. Nothing happened from it, and they were sharing like, "Hey, we caught it. You may not. So this is an issue." And I think that I think some of the things I thought it was great. I agree with you, Jason. That I thought it was really great that they got out ahead of it and said, we're not immune from people trying. And I think that that's the thing about with all these events. It doesn't matter how sophisticated you are. It doesn't matter how well you are at securing your fortress. If they want to find a way into you, they absolutely will.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's obviously something that we see on the larger enterprise side is that, they are incredibly sophisticated. cybersecurity infrastructures in some of these companies, but then you see this like insanely sophisticated attack where you're like, I don't mean to be too curious, but can you tell me more about what you did here? Because that's the nerd in me says like, that's so cool. Like, I cannot believe that you guys figured out that way to get in there and then got data that way. So I'm always fascinated. And these insider jobs, fake employees are kind of what we've always feared, right? Like most of the time back in the day, it was they're across the pond, they're far away, like you don't have to worry about that. But when they have, boots on the ground, it's a totally different ballgame, in my opinion. It's
definitely.
And some of these employees are remote, right? Like they're still across the pond, but I mean, with the SIM swaps and, people here in the US, kind of collaborating and conspiring with the bad guys. It's like I said, different ballgame.
Yeah. And to Stu's point, it all comes back to the identity. So Gwen, curious for you, what's a story that you've been, that's intrigued you over the last month? Anything top of mind?
My dogs are barking really loud.
Perfect timing. Couldn't have done it better.
Do they know how to cook too?
Yeah, switch to the cooking show.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty interested in anything dealing with Petco or
what do they think about DeepSeek?
They don't really care about DeepSeek.
Jason was going to lead off with that one. You want to punt to Jason first and then come back?
I was thinking about, have you guys heard of ClickFix? And I know I'm going to butcher the name of the threat actor group. I think they were previously Emerald Sleep, maybe. Might also be known as Kimsuki, which is, Stu's, exciting story was about North Koreans posing as employees, but these are North Koreans posing as South Korean government officials and calling up folks and building a rapport with them and then sending an email with an embedded link. And I think that's kind of, an embedded link is a PowerShell script and some malicious downloads through a PDF. But, I think that, again, this goes back to that human element of, really working to get in through that most vulnerability, for lack of a better word, is the employees that you have. And it's, here you're on the phone with somebody thinking this is sounds right. Absolutely. Somebody from, the government's calling me. And I worry that, with the change in guard, that we're seeing and so many different things coming out of, these changes in our government, how likely it would be for somebody here in the US to fall for something like that. Very quick, we're building up a new program or we're shutting one down
or anything involving money. Hey, do you want to close this deal? Those are the incentives.
I mean, so many things, because I think that, we're kind of in a little bit of chaos right now in the US of the change between presidents. And there's a lot of changes going on in, the regulatory structure. Investigations getting shut down, and it's maybe I was involved with an investigation and somebody was calling me. Maybe they're picking that back up, or I don't know.
The example you gave of what's it, ClickFix? Did you say ClickFix was the name?
Yes. Yeah.
It makes me think of all of those court order scams. People just think I haven't done anything wrong, but this looks official, so I better answer it because it looks very official.
Because they don't want to get in trouble. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Or you see it. So a lot of the early on phishing, not now, it's so much better with GPT and stuff. But the early on phishing, there was a lot of scams that came looking from a higher authority, which Gwen is laying out with this one, is a higher authority inquiring and almost catching that psychological want to say, it wasn't me, I'm not in trouble. That first inclination of I'm in trouble, I have to respond, or I have to respond to authority.
And it's I can click on something to fix it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a very easy fix. I just click on this and it's going to go away. And it's like,
A much more mundane is the like the senior citizen who's just on the computer surfing and that pops up on a website and they just try to click it and then the credentials are stolen and they're of course using the same credentials that they're using for for their bank account. So then the bank account gets drained. I think the click fix scams been around for a really long time in some way or another. I do agree with you, Glo, when anytime that there's tumult or controversy or change, there are going to be opportunist criminals that take advantage of the situation. I remember during COVID, immediately there were fake SMS text messages going out with malware or credential hunting that were saying, "Oh, these people were infected in your neighborhood," and you're like, "Oh, I better go click on that." Anytime that there's some sort of public situation, and I agree, with all the news coming out that there's people who are going to take advantage of the uncertainty and say, this is a new rule, you need to follow it, click here. And then someone who's ignorant or naive or just working too quickly and not thinking all the way through will just click, because we're on click run all day long. Our brains are on click run all day long. And that's what the bad guys hope for. And I agree with you. It's a busy time.
yeah, that's one thing I always talk to victims of crime. I mean, before my prior career, as you guys know, a homicide prosecutor, but also in cyber world, like our clients are victims of crime. And I am consistently, warning people that right now your hair is on fire. You are so stressed out. The emotions are high. You are at your most vulnerable for either another attack or for people to your point, Stu, to take advantage of you. And I think that's one thing that I find the most disheartening about cyber is that you have a company that is going through an incredibly awful situation, and there are impacts of that. There are employees that rely on a paycheck. There is, service to be done. And somebody's in there saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. I'll charge you, all of these things, but we can do it all. People like, false credentials. I can do cyber. No, maybe you can't do cyber, but you want to do cyber. And then they get hit on the back end through plaintiffs' counsel and regulators and everybody. It's the worst case of blame the victim around. And I think, it's really sad. I think, you will continue to be vulnerable. People are going to use those vulnerabilities to get in and to take advantage of you all the way through.
You're like looping in the technical and the psychological all together.
Social engineering to a T.
Perfect ending. Jason, Stu, anyone want to close us out on this Valentine's Day?
I have one last question for Nate. DeepSeek, is it security risk or is it just overhype?
I mean, obviously, it largely depends on your engagement with AI platforms and your willingness to input information that you shouldn't be inputting into those platforms. I'm leaning towards overhype, but I don't know.
There's tried and true best practices for all technology. And if you have a policy in place on how to use it and, what it is, and you're, educating people on it, there are safe uses. But again, don't trust everybody to follow the policy and the guidelines, because your information is probably going to be in there somewhere. But
well, I will make a prediction on DeepSeek, and my prediction is that 1 year from now, DeepSeek as it currently exists will not be available in the United States.
I think that's fair. We'll see how TikTok plays out first.
TikTok fully, I'll be happy.
I know, right?
That's why I qualified it as it exists today.
As it exists today, yeah. Also, just to add on the cooking front update is someone just got mad at me because she pulled in an entire tray of Play-Doh treats, all made for you guys, and then I ruined it because I did something. I'm not sure how, but it was about to turn into a cooking show at the end.
Almost full circle. Next time. All right. Well, with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will be back next month with some new guests. So Nate and Gwen, thanks for joining us here.
Bye.
Thanks for
Happy
having me.